everyone. We've got an amazing story for you, the life and work of Emily Pauline Johnson. If you've never heard about her life, her story, I think you'll be very, very excited because oh, she's one of the greatest poets and performers of Canada, and her journey is very fascinating because she talks a lot about identity, creativity, and she broke barriers at that time, and is very interested to see her work and her life through that time. So let's rewind to March 10th, 1861. Born on the Six Nations Reserve near Brantford, Ontario, Pauline Johnson came from a really unique background. Her father was a respected Mohawk chief, and her mother was an English immigrant. Growing up in a house called Chief's Wood, she was surrounded by tradition, storytelling, and the beautiful landscapes of Ontario, all things that would go on to shape her art. And she didn't get much formal schooling, but she was passionate about literature, soaking up stories from both indigenous and English perspectives. But here's the part that made her stand out. Pauline Johnson knew how to light up a room. When she started touring in the 1890s, she wasn't just reading poems from notes. She would walk onto the stage dressed as a Mohawk Indian princess, think elaborate beads, embroidered robes, capture the crowd's attention, and then, part away through the show, switch into a Victorian style gown. This wasn't just for show, it was her way of honoring both sides of her heritage and challenging the audience to think about identity and culture in a new way. People loved it. She performed all over Canada, the United States, and even the UK, making a name for herself at a time when Indigenous women had almost no presence in the arts. Her poetry and stories often reflected this mix of cultures. Pauline wrote about Canadian landscapes, First Nation legends, and big questions about belonging. Her first major book, The White Wampum, got rave reviews in London, and her later collections, Flint and Feather and Canadian Born, became classics. She didn't stop at poetry though. In Vancouver later in her life, she published Legends of Vancouver, collecting local indigenous stories that are still beloved in the city today. But Pauline Johnson wasn't just an artist, she was an influencer in the best sense. At a time when views about race and gender were pretty restrictive, she proved you could be proudly mixed, creative, and fearless. When she died in 1913, her work didn't fade away. Schools were named after her, her home became a historical site, and even in recent years, people continue to rediscover her poems and stories. She helped bridge the gap between cultures, and she was a pioneer for indigenous and women's voices.
Hi everyone! I'd like to start telling you something very symbolic about Pauline Johnson's life. She grew up in a house that had two doors of entrance. One opening to her father's Mohawk words and the others to her mother's English one. Two doors, two words, and between them a girl who would learn to walk proudly in both. From a young age, Pauline absorbed stories, songs, and traditions from both sides of her family. From the rhythm of Mohawk legends to the structure of English poetry, she built a foundation that would shape her life and her art. After her father passed away in 1884, Pauline began to write seriously to help support her family. But writing became much more than a duty. It became her way of expressing pride, courage, and resistance. Pauline Johnson was adventurous, eloquent, and proud of her ancestry. She was outspoken, defending indigenous rights and celebrating the beauty of her culture and every poem she shared.
Hi everyone, let's talk about Johnson's characteristics and the impact. She has many aspects with a great journey in Canadian literature. Emily Pauline Johnson was a writer activist who used her literature to expose the colonial actions against the Indigenous Canadian people. She is recognized in Canadian literature, particularly in her works, where Johnson emphasizes certain themes, including Indigenous culture, Canadian inheritance, racism, and sexism. Johnson faces the racist challenge in Canada during her life. She was of both Mohawk and European heritage, and the Canadian society treated her as a half-breed, considering her mixed heritage. Also, Johnson faced sexism in the 19th century because of her gender and indigenous heritage. She was criticized for her dual heritage, being mixed her race identity in her literary works. Johnson is considered an important writer for Canadian authors to demonstrate the Canadian identity. According to Mohawk writer Beth Brant, Pauline Johnson's physical body died in 1913, but her spirit is still communicated to us, who are native women writers. She walked the writing path, clearing the brush for us to follow, said the Mohawk author. In her performances, Johnson utilized a dual personality to express her perspectives in her works, beginning with performance in traditional indigenous regalia to present her Mohawk-themed poems, and then changed in a Victorian gown to recite her Canadian and European-oriented verses. The Canadian Indigenous writer is an example of a racist in academic recognition. Johnson faced criticism from other Canadian writers for her dual identity in her works and performances. According to Charles Lillard, 1988, he criticized her writers, such as tourists, grandmothers, and the curious. Johnson faced criticism during her life and after her death, the criticism against her works. Nowadays, Johnson is considered an important woman writer for Canada. She is a voice of originality and culture for her country and people. Her works demonstrated how the power of an Indigenous woman can be echoed through literary art, utilizing the poems and performance to demonstrate how the society was hypercritical about human differences. Johnson influenced some Canadian writers. They are Janet Armstrong, Charlotte Nero, Janet Rogers, Joan Craig. Also, she influenced some Indigenous playwrights, utilizing the theatrical performances, romantic poetry, and dramatic short stories.
Now it's time to talk about the poet/author's main works, starting by White Wampum. Released in 1895, the work portrays indigenous tropes, Canadian landscapes, and the feeling of identity and belonging. There is also a clear blend between the Victorian period and indigenous symbols, such as a wampum. According to Carol Jerson, the author was strategic because she presented a less politicized version of the book to the London publisher, later changed. The poetic persona of the following stretch of poem is an indigenous woman during a farewell descent to her husband, as its own name suggests. Go then and fight. If thou shouldest win the right to hold this land within, thy children's keeping strong and fast, God's blessings on thy arm is cast. Moving on to Flint and Feather, her best known work, widely read in schools, college, and public events, a classic. Released in 1912, the work present in this collection portrays the contrast of its title, strength and sensitivity, flint and feather, and is also related to her personal identity. It maintains a civic and lyrical tone, advocating for women and indigenous rights, defying gender and ethnical roles. The musicality feature of this work served to crystallize her as a poet that was also a performer and to invite the reading act and make it accessible. They called him a thief and hunted him down, a brute of a man, uncrowned. But he robbed no poor man's store or herd. He took but what his own land stirred. One of her most analyzed works, it denounces the racism towards indigenous people. The main character is accused of stealing something that was originally his. He stole nothing at all. The word uncrowned reveals the author's point of view, filled with criticism and smart wordplays in both reading and meaning, by opposing the most iconic figure that represents colonization, the British Crown.
So guys, thank you so much for watching this video. We hope you liked it. Feel free to share with your classmates, your colleagues, and for finishing our debate, our ideas, we'd like to give you a reflection question. It's how did this video change your mind about indigenous literature in other countries besides Brazil? Think about it. Okay? That's it. Bye bye.